Recently, I read an article on The Appeal. It was an incredibly well-researched and well-written piece about the New York Police Department's investigations into rape accusations, and it raised a lot of really concerning details about the level of seriousness with which these sorts of accusations are pursued. We're gonna talk about it here. Now, I want you to bear in mind that obviously this is about rape and sexual assault, and so it's incredibly distressing material. If that is triggering to you, just bear in mind that that is what we're going to be discussing. But we're joined now by Meg O'Connor, the writer for The Appeal. Meg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you on. Like I said, a great report, and I'm excited to learn more about what is going on in New York. Why are they having so much difficulty, even in comparison to other areas in investigating these sorts of cases?
Yeah, well, it's the New York and the NYPD's Special Victims Division has been kind of a mess for a while now. In March 2018, the city's Department of Investigation released a report showing that the NYPD is essentially just systemically understaffed the Special Victims Division. So you have 67 detectives assigned to investigate something like 5,600 sex crimes, and that's just not enough time to like rape cases are complicated, and so you have detectives with way too many cases they could ever investigate, and they end up doing this like cruel moral calculus where they decide, well, the ones where I don't think I can actually get a conviction, I'm just not going to investigate. The ones where the victim was drunk or it's an acquaintance, those don't become a priority. And the NYPD has just resisted for a long time calls to actually assign more detectives of their like 40,000 people that work for the NYPD to the Special Victims Division.
That just strikes me as so bizarre because it's hard to come up with much more significant crimes than rape and sexual assault. It's the definition of a horrendous, violent crime. For them to not prioritize it, I mean, I would love to know what their resources are being put into. Obviously, they're not investigating Wall Street executives or anything like that. So it seems like a dereliction of duty to just so casually put these cases aside. And I think I remember in your reporting, you talked about, particularly in Queens, I think it was, the unfounded rape report rate was significantly higher than even the other boroughs surrounding it. What can you tell me about that?
So I think Queens was something like maybe 14%. It was higher than the other ones, but yeah, when you have and last year the data showed that the NYPD closed their nearly 2,000 reported rapes. They closed about 500 of them, so that's 1/4, as the victim allegedly no longer wanting to cooperate. So when you see a lot of unfounded rapes or you see a lot of rapes closed due to an alleged lack of participation from the victim, it should be a cause for concern as to the way that the NYPD is actually investigating those crimes, because it would be really unusual to have 1/4 of victims who come forward to report a crime in the first place then changing their mind, and it kind of speaks volumes to the way that the NYPD, that detectives are responding to the victims when they come forward. Like, what are they doing that is turning people off from the process, that is making people feel like they can't move forward with this or they aren't being believed.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because I can already predict how some right-wing commentators would respond to those numbers. They would say, "Look, it's what we've been saying. Women are making these things up." But you know, I myself and I think a lot of people recently watched the series Unbelievable on Netflix that sort of demonstrated how even a person who 100% went through this experience can be dissuaded from going forward when the people who are in a position to provide justice for you appear to have no interest in it. And so I'm also curious, you're describing New York numbers here. Do you have any knowledge about in other areas of the country? Is New York really an outlier? Is it generally the case that these sorts of crimes are taken seriously outside of New York?
No, it's definitely not the case that rape is taken very seriously anywhere it happened. It's usually the crime. Any crime could be unfounded. A robbery could be unfounded. An auto theft could be unfounded. But rape is by far the most common crime to have unfounded. And like by the FBI's definition, that would mean that it was false or baseless. So you do certainly see it's just kind of a culture of police departments not to take rape very seriously unless they're the kind of like Law and Order SVU type rapes where it's very violent or there's a stranger. But there are many cases even with those where police just still don't want to put in the time and resources into this sort of crime.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately shows like SVU have led people to believe that that is what rape is like, when actually far more of them don't necessarily take place in alleys and those sorts of things. So based on your research, do you have any suggestions that you think changes that could be made, reforms that could be made that would help to fix this situation in New York or around the country?
It's a very difficult situation to improve because you're kind of leaving it in the hands of the police officers, who are themselves kind of reluctant to take these kinds of crimes very seriously. Like I think one of the just most basic things that you could do to improve the situation is to actually staff special victims units appropriately. So, I was saying before that there was 67 detectives to investigate nearly 6,000 crimes, and the homicide squads had 101 detectives to investigate 282 homicides. So that gives you a sense of like how the department from the top down prioritizes crimes and where they think resources need to be directed. But it's really difficult. You need to hire investigators who actually have this sort of mindset where like they understand that most rapes are acquaintance rapes, and many people are raped by somebody they know, and there's alcohol involved, and there's tricky cases, and that the time and the understanding just needs to be there to actually take them seriously.
One final question: do we have any idea of the gender breakdown of the investigators in the Special Victims Unit?
I'm not really sure about that actually, but from the photos that the NYPD is so fond of posting of their investigators, it seems like it's mostly men.
Okay, well, that's another thing that potentially they could look into. Meg O'Connell, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody watching this should definitely go to the Appeal and take a look at your article. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.